It's one of the most important questions that you will ever have to answer in your life. And how you answer this one question, that I'm going to share with you in a moment, will have a direct impact on all the critical choices that you will make in your life. If you answer this question I'm going to raise with you in just a moment, if you answer this question incorrectly, then you're going to set yourself up for extraordinary struggle and pain that you would not have to face if you answered the question correctly. You answer the question correctly, and you're going to give yourself an advantage in life that so many are missing. And you're going to provide yourself a ready defense against so many of life's pressures and temptations and obstacles. Ready for the question? Here it comes. 3 words. Write it down. Who am I? Who am I? The question sounds simple, but it points to so many profound thoughts that rummage about inside our soul, thoughts that trouble us, haunt us, that drive us. Why is this question so important to answer? Well, think of it. The question, who am I, points to my identity. So many struggle with this today. What defines me? My gender? They tell me I have 2 sexes, but then the average human has 5 genders. I'm so confused. Is it Bruce or Caitlin? I think it's sad, but then they tell me not to be sad, that it's wrong to be sad. Who am I? Maybe my race defines my identity. Skin color is such a hot-button issue today. Or the size of my bank account. Or my family name. Where I went to school. How about my digital self? We all today create this false self we put out in the world for all to see. And we invite people to like us. Truth be told, I see all kinds of identity confusion today. You answer the question, who am I, and you answer it properly, you'll be less confused. The question, who am I, also points to my purpose. Why am I here? What's the whole point in me being here? Why am I walking this earth right now? What am I supposed to do with my life? If I find the correct answer to the question, who am I, I'll be able to answer that question also. The question, who am I, also points to my value. Do I have any worth? Does it matter that I'm here? What's the value of my life? So many young people today, especially, you talk about social media, they define their value by social media. Just last week, a father cut off his teenage daughter's hair as a punishment for something, which is foolish and idiotic enough. Right there, that shows you he's a moron. That's child abuse. That's not punishment. But then, posted the pictures on Facebook, thinking he could shame her into right behavior. Instead, he killed her because she took her own life. Would to God this young girl had had some sense of her true value. Perhaps it might have protected her from her father's stupidity. Who am I? It's arguably the most important question to be asked in life. And this morning we're going to attempt to find an answer for it in the best place possible, obviously, the Word of God. But secondarily, in the life of one of the Bible's most famous people, and you know who that is, we've been advertising it, the life of a man called David. David is right up there in terms of Bible heroes. If you were to take a survey, the top 5 people in the Bible, David will invariably be in most people's list. In fact, he's so great that we're devoting an entire sermon series to him. In the summer, we're going to walk alongside David. We're going to hang out with him and learn what it is that made him so great. And let me give you 4 reasons just by way of a quick introduction, in case some of you don't even know who David is or you've never read about him. Let me give you 4 reasons to put him on the map of your heart right now. First reason he was great, he was the greatest of Israel's kings. He was like George Washington was for the United States. David came early in the life of the nation, just like George Washington, and he cast a long and noble shadow, just like George Washington did. He was Israel's 2nd king. He replaced a man named Saul, who was very weak, very self-absorbed, and idolatrous. With the exception of a couple hiccups, and they were significant hiccups, David's reign was long and was blessed. During his rule, Israel achieved independence from her enemies and rose to become, in his time, the greatest nation on the earth at the time. All because of David. Secondly, David's kingship became a prototype of the coming Messiah. Write that down. Prophecies and promises were given to David by God that a descendant would arise from his line who would be like him. And the rule of that descendant, when he came, would never end and would bring peace to the whole earth. Messiah would in fact be known as a son of David. And that's how one of the ways in which they described Jesus when he arose. Son of David, have mercy on me. Thirdly, David was the Shakespeare of his time. Anybody know when David lived? He rose to power in... What's that? Close. 900 BC. So close. So we're talking about a guy who's late Bronze Age, nearly 3,000 years ago. He was the greatest writer, greatest poet, greatest musician of his generation. Nearly half of the Bible's 150 Psalms are attributed to David's pen. Whenever you are tempted to think of people from the late Bronze Age as no better than the Geico caveman, I want you to think of David and read him, because he will humble you and remind you in no time that outside of our technology, outside of maybe the clothes we wear and some cultural practices that you and I would find strange, David, just like us. You ever stared at a starry sky at night and felt small and humbled and in awe? Maybe you ever had that experience? So did David. Listen to his words from Psalm 8. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man that you care for him. You ever done something really awful and afterwards you just felt really terrible about it and you wondered how God could possibly ever forgive you, and why is it that I keep doing this? You ever struggle with that? Raise your hand. Everybody get your hand up. You were lying. David felt that way too. He wrote in Psalm 51, he cried out to God, create in me a pure heart, O God. Renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence. Take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation. That's no caveman writing. Words so beautiful, so poignant, so evocative. No one could do better today, 3,000 years later. There's a fourth reason David was great. It's the reason we want to journey with him this summer. He's the one man in all the Bible who is praised by God himself with the most unique and astonishing words. The Bible calls David a man after God's own heart. Write that down. A man after God's own heart. The reference comes in 1 Samuel 13. Isn't there a part of your soul that would love to be known by God that way? As a man, a woman, a child, after God's own heart? Oh, I hunger for that. There's something noteworthy, there's something that just stood out about David's love for God and the trust he had in God that you and I should be inspired by and should seek to imitate. And so, to discover exactly what that means to be a man or woman after God's own heart, we're going to walk with David this summer. He wasn't born great. In fact, he wasn't recognized as great by those around him at first, as the story that Larry read for us describes today. But God saw something great in him, and in the end, that's all that matters, is what God says. So today, let's look at the story of how God introduced David to the world, and as we consider this story, we're going to answer that question: who am I? We're going to learn truths about our identity and our purpose and our value. Hopefully fill your heart with hope this morning. If you're feeling this morning like your life is basically pointless and you just can't figure out why you're here, that your future just is empty, let's hang out with David tomorrow, today, and I think it'll change. Our story picks up in 1 Samuel 16. So let's open our Bibles up. Let's read. 1 Samuel in your Bible, it's right before 2 Samuel. Just want to help you out if you can't find it. Verse 1, the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil, be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've chosen one of his sons to be king. A couple quick points of context. We've already mentioned Saul. He's the current king, first king that Israel's ever had, and he is running Israel into the ground, as I said. He's a man of weak faith. He's mentally unstable, in fact. He's impulsive, violent, power-hungry. How did he come to power, you say? Samuel helped him. Samuel, who was he? He was the great spiritual leader of the nation at this time. He was the last of Israel's judges, the greatest of her prophets in this generation. He's a man of great prayer and great integrity. And he's heartsick because he knows that he's at least partially responsible for unleashing Saul on Israel. But God says to him here in verse 1, in so many words, okay, Samuel, stop feeling bad about this, because I'm working here, and it's time for action. And I love this verse because it's a reminder that we need to call to mind periodically, that God is always working. Jesus said, my Father is always working. And when we come to the end of our resources and the end of our abilities, rather than collapsing on ourselves and have ourselves a great big pity party, what we ought to be doing instead is turning to God. Because with God, there's always hope. God, it's like I had this thought this winter. Remember this winter? So long ago now, but you remember it? That's why Dave and Kathy are leaving us. I remember the Spirit speaking to my heart. Some words to this effect this winter. Son, to me, every day's a spring day. And I thought, that's a cool thought. God doesn't have winter. With Him, every day has promise, has possibility. There's always hope. All the way through to our deathbeds. To the very last day on earth, there's always hope for the child of God. For anyone who grabs hold of Jesus and says, Lord, help me. So God tells Samuel to go to where? Jesse's house, which isn't where? Let's get out the World Atlas and find it. Bethlehem. Oh, that's interesting. Bethlehem. Considering that David will be the prototype for the future Messiah, I find that kind of interesting. Bethlehem. If that doesn't speak to you, you need to learn more about Christmas and winter and cold and chill. Verse 2. Samuel said, how can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me. In this little sentence, we're given insight into the web of fear that Saul has spun over everything. Saul is so desperate to remain in power that with the threat of a replacement being whispered about, he sends out his stormtroopers to consolidate his power and to force compliance to his rule. And so you can just picture it by this one sentence. There is a pall of dread over everyone. And it's everywhere. We see it in verse 4. Samuel comes to Bethlehem. And look how he's greeted, this great man. Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. Why? Who were they afraid of? Saul. He's going to catch wind of this visit. And he was going to enact vengeance. They asked, do you come in peace? Oh, that's an interesting question. Turning our note sheets over, verse 5. Samuel replied, yes, in peace. And truly, he has come in peace. Coming in peace, listen to me, friends, coming in peace does not mean you're not going to make waves. Coming in peace does not mean you're not going to ruffle any feathers. Sometimes to come in peace means you've come to shake things up. Push back against what's wrong. It's like the family that finally deals with the addict in its midst, or the alcoholic, or the abuser. Because until you fix what's wrong, you never will have peace. No matter how serene things seem on the outside. Sometimes to heal, you first have to wound. The first part of surgery is you have to cut. The first part of teaching is you have to correct. It's not easy. It's not always pleasant. It hurts. But peace will not be had any other way. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord, Samuel says. To bring peace requires sacrifice. Effort, rolling up your sleeves. Blessed are the peacemakers, Jesus said. Notice he didn't say, blessed are the peacekeepers. He said peacemakers. Beth Moore points out that peacekeepers are people who sweep things under the rug. They're the ones that look about and see the chaos everywhere and go, chaos? I don't see any chaos. So desperate to keep the peace. But no, blessed are the peacemakers. Peacemaking is tough. It's uncomfortable. It requires sacrifice and consecration. And look what Samuel says. Consecrate yourselves. Come to the sacrifice with me. And then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. Verse 6. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab. And he thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. Now Jesse had, we'll find out in a few verses, 7 sons. And here's what's going on. They're brought up. It's like American Idol. They just line up right before Samuel, presumably oldest to youngest. And Eliab's the firstborn. He's the oldest. And so Samuel sees him and says, if ever there's king material, here it is. Question, what do you think Samuel was basing his thoughts upon? Just the sheer physical appearance of Eliab. And he shouldn't have done this. He should have known better, because this is the sort of thinking that got them into trouble with Saul. Because when Saul was selected, the Bible tells us in chapter 9 of 1 Samuel that Saul was, and I quote, an impressive young man without equal among the Israelites, a head taller than any of the others. And when Samuel presents Saul before the nation in chapter 10, he cries out to the people, do you see the man that God has chosen? There is no one like him among the people. But did you notice the words? Do you see? It's all based on looks. Boy, you talk about things not changing. Talk about human nature staying the same century after century. Is this not the same way it is for us today? We decide the identity, the value, and purpose of things based on how it looks on the outside. Well, thankfully, this time around, Samuel is prayed up. He's very close to God at this moment. And he realizes his mistake. As a prophet, he is privileged with the ability to hear directly from God from time to time. And God in this moment speaks to him. Verse 7. The Lord said to Samuel, pay attention to these words. There's a key verse coming. Key thought coming. Get your hand up to catch the thought. I want to make sure you're going to catch this as we read it, okay? It's going to fly by fast. You've got to grab it. Right? Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks to the heart. Did you get it? This may be one of the most important verses in the whole Bible, and I mean that. If you want to have a good life, if you want to have a blessed life, a happy life, a successful life, you better drink deeply from this verse and take it into your soul. Your true identity, your true value, your true purpose is embedded in these words. Samuel doesn't need to be told twice. He calls the next son in line Abinadab. Why don't we name our kids Abinadab anymore? I'm always looking for Bible names, but I don't meet any Abinadabs. That's probably why the Lord rejected him, because of his name, Abinadab. Nope, he's not the one. Then next up is Shema. Sorry, thanks for playing. Maybe next year. And in all, 7 sons pass by. And no lights go off in Samuel's spirit. And Samuel's confused because God told him to seek out Jesse. One of his sons would be king. And he looks at Jesse and he says, are these all the sons you have? Lord help Jesse's wife, but no, there's an 8th boy in the family. There's still the youngest, Jesse answers, but he's tending the sheep. Oh, that's a loaded sentence. Watching the sheep, that's a job you give to the run of the family. It's like cleaning the cat litter. It's a menial job that nobody wants. It's like the hotel maid who does the laundry. You know, you put her deep into the basement of the hotel so nobody can see her. It never occurs to Jesse that the 8th son who is David, would be under consideration here, would be eligible. Samuel says, go get him. We'll wait right here. And David's brought in from the fields. Verse 12. So he sent, had him brought. He was ruddy with a fine appearance and handsome features, which is not entirely a compliment, actually. Whereas Saul was a head taller than everyone else, he was muscular, he was chiseled, he looked the part of the king. This sentence is the author's way of saying that David had scarcely started shaving yet, is what he's saying. And it's not that David wasn't resourceful, strong, valiant, and intelligent. We learn, next chapter in the story of David and Goliath, that this young lad, David, had single-handedly slain first a lion and then a bear when it sauntered into his field one day. But no doubt at the dinner table that night when he tried to tell the story, hey guys, in that little prepubescent voice, hey guys, guess what I did today? I killed him. And can you just picture it, trying to get a word in edgewise with these other brothers and sisters? Oh, what did you do, David? Did you chase away a pack of fleas today? Nobody knows about what David's been doing in the fields. How many of you, just curious, are or were the youngest in your family? Raise your hand. Do you know what David's feeling like right now? Do you get it? Oh, nod your head. You can nod your head. I know that you're the youngest. You were told not to do that. You're just being. Well, if you are the youngest in your family, what happens next should thrill you. Then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. He is the one. Verse 13. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. From that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. How? Now, key question. Why did God choose David? Don't miss this. It's the heart of the story, and it's the heart of where you will find your true identity, your true value, and your true purpose. God did not choose David because he was little, because he was weak, because he was young. God chose David because of his heart. He chose him because of his heart. Remember that phrase we used a little earlier? David was a man after God's own heart. Unbeknownst to his father Jesse or any of his brothers, something else was going on in those fields as David tended the sheep. Do you know what else was going on? David was seeking God. Many young men and women left alone will give themselves to empty things, or worse. God help the adolescent today left alone with a computer. David sought God. Not only that, we know that David played the lyre, which was the guitar of his time. He didn't go down to Guitar Center, he went down to the Lyre Center down there in Bethlehem. They had one there, and they play around with the lyres and the lutes. Is that what Bob and I were talking about this earlier? The lyre isn't really like a guitar, but anyway. I was counting on Bob to bring in my... David became exceptionally skilled at the lyre. We know this. He played for hours on end. He became one of the best instrumentalists in his time as a young man, 20 or younger. We know that he became one of the best in his time because King Saul actually hired him, brought him in, and when David would play, it would ease the mental illness that Saul had. You know what else David was doing with that lyre in those fields? Do you know what he was doing? He was writing songs. How do we know that? Because we have at least 73 of them in our Bibles. We call them songs. And do you know what these songs that David wrote tell us about him? Songs will always tell you about the author. They tell us that he loved God with every fiber in his young being. And he trusted God with all his might. And he made it his one desire to seek God out, to grow in him, and to devote his life to him. This young man had exceptional faith. He derived his sense of identity and value and his sense of purpose, not from his father, not from his family, Not from his popularity or his physical strength. He derived it from God. He knew that God had created him, and that God knew him, and that God loved him. And for David, that was all that mattered. Listen to what David writes in Psalm 139. Here's the Shakespeare of his time. He would be considered such today if he were being published for the first time. Listen to his words in Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me, and you know me. You know when I sit, you know when I arise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Because David knew he mattered to God, then it didn't matter that he was the youngest in his family, despised by his brothers, overlooked by his father. Because David knew that he mattered to God, it didn't matter how he looked. That he wasn't fully developed yet. He wasn't as fine a specimen as Eliab was. It didn't matter that his muscles weren't as big as Shammah's were. Because David knew that he mattered to God, it didn't matter that he didn't have a lot of friends, that he was often alone, that at school he wasn't the popular kid. He wasn't the varsity football star with the cheerleaders hanging all over him. It didn't matter that he didn't have hundreds of Facebook friends, and that when he would post one of his songs online, nobody liked it right away. It didn't matter to him, because he mattered to God. And that's all that mattered. What mattered is that the most important being in the universe, the most powerful being in all the universe, the most eternal being in all the universe, that being looked on him, created him, called him, knew him, and loved him. And because of that, David's identity and his sense of worth and his sense of purpose was unshakable. And I know what this is like because I experienced this when I was young. My father worked for a Midwestern railroad company, and we moved a lot as I was growing up. Every 3-4 years we had to pack up and move to another town. And the older I got, the harder this got. Having to start over, find a new group of friends, new school, oh my goodness. I know exactly what it's like to be bullied. It's a big thing today. I was bullied in the 6th grade. After our latest move, the new kid on the block became an easy target. I was subject to virtually daily harassment on the bus ride to school, there and back, in the school hallways, in the classroom when the teacher would leave. I was beat up, I was cursed at. If we had had Facebook back then, I would have known what it was like to have digital mud slung all over me. One thing saved me. One thing. That's what saved David. Because of our constant moving, I read a lot. It helped to pass the time. It ignited my imagination, and it inspired me to start to write my own stories, journal. In the third and fourth grade, when my classmates were studiously poring over Berenstain Bears, you know what I was reading? Bram Stoker's Dracula in its entirety. That's a thick book. I read Alexandre Dumas's The Three Musketeers. It remains to this day my favorite book of all. If you've never read The Three Musketeers, you are missing on one of the just classic books of all time. 4th grade, I'm reading this. And I started to read the Bible. I was given a Bible in the 3rd grade by my church, and I started to read it. And I still have my Bible. In fact, I threw it up here. Didn't throw it. No. This is my 3rd grade Bible, right here. You guys think it's been read? I started reading this in the 3rd and 4th grade. Not only that, but I started underlining things that I found interesting, putting stars by things. And the place where I found the greatest comfort and help is the book of Psalms. This is the scribbling and underlining of a 3rd and 4th grade young boy reading his Bible. He wrote in his Bible, that 3rd and 4th grade boy, Psalm 2. This psalm, I believe, is not written just to the kings, but to us also. We should not go against God and try to live without Him. How's that theology for a 3rd grader? As I read, Lord began to strengthen my heart, began to speak to me of His love for me. At the age of 11, I gave my life to Christ at the end of a Billy Graham movie, and Billy Graham's ministry then began to send me child-appropriate Bible study materials. I would fill them out and send them back, and they would write back with corrections and encouragement, and we kept on this correspondence for a year or two. I will never doubt that a young person is capable of extraordinary, real faith because I had it and I really loved Jesus. Oh, and in the 3rd grade I started taking guitar lessons too. Just saying. I started playing the lyre. And I wrote a few songs. And I came to learn what David learned, that God made me, that God knew me, that God called me, and that God loved me. And it was that rock-solid assurance that as a child I grabbed hold of that kept me afloat during those years. You would have looked in the lunchroom during those years, and you would have seen a boy sitting off by himself, and you would have thought to yourself, that poor kid. You would have thought me shy. You would have thought me unpopular, needy, weak. You would have never known, and in fact I did not know, that there was a type A personality in that adolescent frame. You'd never know that there was a kid here that was good with words. I didn't even know it yet. God did. And inside, God was making me confident and strong and secure because I had a relationship with the most important being in the universe. First time I gave a speech in my freshman class in high school was on the dangers of TV. That was my topic. You should have seen their mouths drop to the floor. What? The kid in the lunchroom? And they were laughing. I had them in my hands. They applauded me at the end. I went on, graduated with honors, developed friends. I even had girlfriends. Just saying. I got a job. I moved on to college with a clear sense of purpose. I left those bullies in the dust with them still poring over their Berenstein Bear books. And all because of Jesus. None of that would have happened if Jesus Christ had not claimed my heart. Because without Jesus, I do not know how I would have coped with all that pain and all that emptiness that was trying to break in and shatter me. And dear ones, you need Jesus Christ today more than ever. The world with its technology today has only made these pressures and temptations that would crush us all the worse. And how this generation needs to hear it loudly and clearly today. That your identity is not defined by Hollywood, by Facebook, by the media, or the latest opinion poll. Your identity is defined by the God who made you. He made you into a man or a woman, and He gave you a marker to tell you which you are so you can grow into it. Don't be confused about this. You don't have to experiment with it. Don't listen to Miley Cyrus or to Bruce or Caitlyn Jenner. They're not speaking truth to you. Their way will only lead to hurt and confusion. But your identity is much more than that even. You are so much more than a man or a woman. You are so much more than black or white, American or Mexican. You are a unique creation of the living God. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Lock eyes with your neighbor right now, and you tell them you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Say it with some degree of seriousness, because it is true. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. It matters that you're here because God chose to put you here. And you need to learn to draw your deepest sense of identity from the one who made you. And your value is defined by who made you. Your worth is not defined by how you look, by how developed you are, or how thin you are, or how smooth your skin is, or how big your muscles are. You are beautiful right now in God's eyes. So stop thinking about killing yourself. Do not crush something precious that God has made. Your worth is not defined by your popularity, by how many friends you have on Facebook. By how many that like you. Stop. Stop with that phony, false self. Stop doing things you hate to be liked. Stop posing, wearing masks, acting cool to be liked. You're already liked. God has already checked the box off. He likes you. Not only that, but He loves you. Do you know that? God made this universe. He loves you. Oh, dear one, how important you are. Your worth is not defined by how big your muscles are, or your grade point average, what college you go to, what talent you have, whether you win or not, whether your baseball team wins or not. Not first place, by the way. 20 games over 500 in June. Woo-hoo-hoo. Just saying. Just saying. Oh, I know that. Believe me. I'm a Cardinal fan, remember? Your worth is not defined by your family. It's not defined by your father. It's defined by your Heavenly Father. And if your dad never said, my son, my daughter, I love you, I'm proud of you, guess what? You got a Heavenly Father who's dying to say that to you. In fact, He died to say that to you. His name is Jesus Christ. He came to this earth for you, for me, and His arms are open wide. Will you come running into them? Like David, will you seek Him? If you feel small today, if you feel unloved, if you feel unusable, if you feel worthless, my dear friend, I want you to take a lesson from King David this morning. And as we close, I want you to take a lesson from the wolves in Yellowstone. Because sometimes the smallest things in life, the fewest things in life, the weakest things in life, matter most to God. Let's take a look at this video as we close this morning.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years, but the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes. And as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. the wolves changed the behaviour of the rivers. They began to meander less, there was less erosion, the channels narrowed, more pools formed, more riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilised the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilised that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.